We'll talk about crickets after the show.
Oh my goodness. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the CarrGuy and SIXFAN Show. And I'm telling you already, we have got a wild show planned tonight. We're going to wait a few minutes till we get some guys into the chat. But before we do that, I want to make sure that we welcome you to the gold standard of automotive talk shows on YouTube. And we're having a really great time here tonight. We've been talking backstage, and we've got a really cool show coming to you guys tonight from down under. But before we hit that, I am Jason. I am the car guy of the CarrGuy and SIXFAN Show, and I think below me is
Grant Tommy, or SIXFAN of the operation. My channel is Straight SIXFAN here on YouTube. I like to focus on budget-minded, relatable, creative builds. Something I like to call offbeat hot rodding, but it's more about our guest right above me, another Jason.
Hey, you all going? Welcome to the land down under.
That's right. Jason is coming to us tonight. Actually, he's coming to you guys tomorrow morning.
From the future.
From the future in Melbourne, Australia. So he's fortunate enough that that he's able to join us, but unfortunately, because of everything that's going on around the world today, he is literally stuck at home. But thank you, Jason, for being a part of the show tonight, and we welcome you to the show.
I appreciate it. Not a problem.
Well, in the chat, we have checking in right now, Mustang Guy 6501, Panther Platform, GMC, Texas. So welcome everybody to the chat. And yeah, we're excited because this is truly the first time we can go international and multi-day, Jason. But the other Jason, the OG Jason, kind of hinted at it, but you're stuck at home. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about what makes it possible for you to do a 10 a.m. live stream broadcast with some blokes like us?
Yeah, of course. So unfortunately, I've had to tie up my kangaroo and leave it in the driveway. But I am based in Melbourne, Australia. So obviously, we're all aware of the COVID-19 situation around the world. Different countries have different, provisions in place with COVID-19. But I'm lucky enough to be based in Melbourne. We're the hardest hit state in Australia. So while the rest of Australia is enjoying car shows and going to pubs and whatnot, us little peasants down in Melbourne have to stay home. So what that basically entails quickly is we have an 8 p.m. curfew. So after 8 p.m., everyone must be legally in their house, otherwise they get fined. We're not allowed to drive over 5 kilometers, and we're only allowed to leave the house for obviously reasons that are valid, such as doing the shopping and whatnot. So it's pretty intense, mainly because the younger generations have never really been through anything like that. But in saying that, I'm still able to play a lot more video games and I guess play with cars a little bit more. But the only downside is it's financially hit us pretty hard because a lot of people legally aren't allowed to work. So yeah, it gives you a quick brief.
So Jason, before we jump right into your channel and what your channel is all about, one of the first questions that we like to start off with any of our guests is asking about first vehicles. Now, being from Canada and and Grant from the U.S., we share a lot of similar vehicles, but down under, you guys pretty much have completely different names or brands, maybe even than what we have up here. So why don't you tell us or tell the group what your first vehicle was?
Firstly, Grant, can you understand anything Jason is saying? Can you please repeat that?
She's like, I think the translation has something to do with, you actually just give it your best shot.
I got first car, so I'm just going to go with that. So I was one of those kids that pretty much drove my parents crazy. So that at the age of 16, I had 2 Series 1 or first generation, you guys call it, or FB RX-7s behind our driveway gate. One was a roller that I bought, and one had a driveline in it, which I was going to swap over. So they were basically my first cars I ever purchased. But my first registered on-road car was a first generation 300ZX, Nissan 300ZX with a Targa top. So yeah, that was I guess that's my my first car experience.
Well, when you say ZX, that Jason might actually understand that, and I don't. ZX for those of you here in the motherland, if you will. Well, Jason, what am I going to call? I'll call him Car Guy. Car Guy had mentioned, yeah, of course, Australia has their own kind of, the General Motors brand is Holden.
Right.
But they kind of have their own spin on things. And I think since we have the unique opportunity to pick an Aussie's brain about just the car culture in general from, decades upon decades, I want to go back to your muscle car era, which, is going to have somewhat of a similar overlap to our era. That's, in the United States, is generally, or North America, I'll say, it's generally kind of accepted like 64 to 72. But I believe in Australia, like your era maybe kind of shifted just a little bit later, maybe started a little bit later and went a little later. How would you define the muscle car era in Australia?
Yeah, so when I think of muscle cars in Australia, I think of probably, I would say not mid-60s, more leaning towards late 60s. But going towards late 70s, depending on obviously the make and model and whatnot. But the muscle cars were basically, Australian muscle car design was basically in an earlier period based off American design. So we have, like you've mentioned, we had Ford and Holden. Holden basically is GM. So a lot of the designs from the earlier Fords and GMs were trickled down into our sort of Australian muscle car era, which and then obviously we shared a lot of the same, I guess, drive lines and whatnot, as well as introducing our own sort of Holden V8 and stuff like that. But most of it was shared with you guys. The only difference is the muscle cars were based on a smaller wheelbase. So like you guys got real big yank tanks, I like to call them. But in Australia, our muscle cars, that's you got horns on the front of it as well. But yeah,
Moose antlers.
But yeah, most of our muscle cars, while having that muscle car shape, were a shorter wheelbase. So yeah, that's good to give you guys a quick explanation.
So before we jump into the next question, we just want to make sure that everybody understands that we're not only live on YouTube right now. After the fact, we do have a podcast, which is on SoundCloud.com, and you just can go over there and you can search for the CarrGuy and SIXFAN Show. We do have some new people who have jumped in to the chat as well. We've got Grimm's Auto Service, America Bumper to Bumper, Maxi. I'm not going to try and pronounce your last name, but welcome, Guy. YouTuber
anyway.
Is his first time. Yeah, I couldn't anyways. And so King Eric, the greatest of all, has also made it into the chat. So Jason, before we kind of dive into a little bit of that muscle car culture, you had said that your first vehicle was a Mazda, and primarily from what I've seen and what I've been following on your channel, Mazda pretty much kind of overtakes a little bit of about what you do. And I can understand that because with myself being a Dodge or Chrysler guy kind of at heart, that was my first vehicle. So you kind of have a taste for what your first vehicle was. And unfortunately, Grant was kind of a Ford guy. But anyways, as we move forward, tell us a little bit about your trip through the Mazda brand and why you still hang on to that today.
Well, let's start off. I've got to be honest. I love everything. I love muscle cars. I love sports cars, classic, whatever. The main reason I've stuck with Mazda is, yes, because I've started my car journey with Mazdas, but there's still most Mazdas, unless they're an RX series, are affordable, whereas Australian muscle cars, have got this price balloon at the moment, which is just out of the general population's reach. You know, like a classic, say, Ford GT, we call it. You have Torinos and stuff. We have our GT series, but say a classic Ford GT could go anywhere from $100,000 to $400,000 Australian. So for someone like me that wants to tinker away, that side of it's more an investment rather than me being able to purchase a car and work on it, because it's just out of my reach. So, but yeah, my growing up when I was in primary school, so primary school is grade 1 to 6. I'm not sure what you guys, I don't know if that works out with you guys, but my father had a RX-7, a Series 1 FB RX-7, and he used to drop me off to school and pick me up to school and stuff in it. And I just used to see this car. I didn't know what it was. I was young. I just used to see this car, you know, with the 80s spec dragways, fats on it, and a bubble body kit and stuff like that, and the weird rotary sound, the buzzing sound. I was like in awe of it. And then as I did my diesel apprenticeship and whatnot, I sort of just learned a bit more about them and started building them myself. And then it just snowballed from there, I guess. And that's why I sort of today I lean towards Mazda. But yeah, I do love the Australian muscle cars as well, but just out of my price reach, unfortunately.
Well, for as much trouble as Jason wants to give me for being a Ford guy, I mean, at some point in time, Ford owned a sizable portion of Mazda, so take that. But no, Mazda, they've had a good line of designers too. I've always appreciated. I mean, I had a Mazda 3. That was my first car out of college. So, so Jason, you talk about the Mazda, the rotary scene. The other interesting part about Australian car culture to me is just your affinity for the burnout and some of the times just the ridiculous amounts of power that you guys down there just throw at cars just to do a wicked 4 or 5 minute long burnout. So what is your favorite, I guess we'll call it like offshoot of Australian car culture? What primarily do you like to modify your cars towards?
Yeah, so in Australia, you're 100% correct. In Australia, people like to build 1,500 horsepower, blown alcohol, cars just to do 2-minute burnouts and get on their roof and cheer and get the crowd involved and stuff. It's been part of the culture for forever. That's just what I guess they love to do. But me personally, I sort of don't understand it, because you spend $30,000, say, on a blown alcohol engine to then rev it off its ringer for 2 minutes to please other people and then blow it up. So I'm thinking, so while I don't get it, even though I'm Australian, not everyone is the same, but I don't get it. But yeah, that is primarily culture, drag racing, and events like, you might have heard events like Summer Nats, which other people have been involved, American people such as like Cletus and stuff. So Summer Nats is like a car festival where you just do burnouts and go to woe, where you take off and stop at the thing, stop at the line, and just stuff like that. That is 100% Australian culture. Burnouts, 100%. I think because Australians have a bit of that bogan culture, which is a bit more of your rednecky culture, I guess. When it comes to like V8s, yeah, go burnout.
Well, I think to some degree, no matter where you're from, and I think we can say this. Obviously, we're talking 3 different countries here tonight. No matter where you're from, no matter what kind of car you're into, you can always appreciate a good burnout. So there's something to be said for that. In fact, when I bought this car here 25 years ago, one of the things I always said that I wanted to do was I just wanted to do burnout. The downfall was it's a 4,500 pound sled, so yeah, it's a little bit tough. But let's talk a little bit about.
I don't think you chose the right car for that, mate.
Let's talk a little bit about your YouTube channel. Now we know that your YouTube channel is cresting that 1,000 subscriber mark, and I just want to throw that out there to anybody that's inside the chat tonight. So that if you go over to his channel, and you like what you see, you're going to, because it's a really well put together channel. Consider subscribing, help them get to that 1,000 subscribers. So, talk a little bit about what brought you into the YouTube scene, and how you've grown your channel from its conception.
Yeah, so obviously my channel is Street Car Culture. So like I touched on earlier, since the age of 16, I've literally always built my own cars, whether it's classic Fords when they were more cheaper, classic Holdens and Mazdas. I've always just tinkered away and built my own cars, but I never filmed it. Maybe I just didn't know really about YouTube at a younger age or whatever. But as I got older, I thought to myself, if I'm tinkering away on my own projects, regardless if I'm filming it or not, I might as well film it and put it out there for the world, because some people might find it interesting. Unfortunately, some people might not, but it's, I don't know, it brings a little bit of excitement to tinkering on the ride, and then you get to interact with I get to interact with a lot more, fans and subs and whatnot. So it just brings a whole new interesting world for me, rather than me just going out and tinkering for 5 hours. I can film it, put it up there for the world to see, and then hopefully some of you blokes find it interesting. But basically, Street Car Culture is my YouTube channel, and then I run a classic car club in Victoria. So we do historic club permits. I'm sure you guys have your own variant of that, but it's basically for cars 25 years and older. Joining my club allows them to be able to go on club permit and stuff like that. So I do that as well as my YouTube club. So it's all just basically one brand to support the scene.
I know when I was perusing your channel, one of the kind of series I liked the best was What's in the Barn, and you featured a Mazda B2000 with a turbocharger bigger probably than the whole intake manifold itself. So I didn't stick around long enough probably to go through many of them, but what's been your most rewarding series on your channel?
Yeah, so I love my What's in the Barn series. So I'm a rarity where I live in a place that's quite a modernish town. So a lot of a lot of places are getting renovated or whatnot to look a bit fancier, and I'm in this little brick home still bunked in the middle of it with just this old ragged falling apart barn in the backyard. And I just thought that's super cool. I got to be able to do something with that. By the way, you'd be surprised how many Australians rip on me for calling it a barn, but I'm literally like, it looks like a barn. The door slides open like it's a barn. But yeah, the series came to me where I thought it's just a different concept where I can sort of introduce the car, slide the door open, just make it more interesting for some viewers than just me hopping in the car and cruising around. It just brings it, hopefully, a bit of creativity, but I'm still fine tuning it. And obviously with COVID, I haven't been able to have cars around, but I most definitely will be getting back into it. And that is probably one of my favorite things to do. And also too, the people that own the cars get excited, and that brings me sort of joy and happiness, be able to showcase them with their pride rather than me just talking about it.
So, as we kind of go back and look at some of the cars that you've had through your driveway over the past years, I know one of the very first videos that I came across when I first joined your channel was back probably in the new year, and you had a Ford Cortina V8, and of course we've never had the Cortinas over here in North America. Nor have we had really anything similar. But if I had to place it towards a variant, I would say probably like the Fairmont of what Grant has, as far as size-wise. What was one of your favorite cars to ever feature? And I know that's kind of going back on what Grant had just said, but did you ever have a favorite?
It's very hard because. Yeah, it's very hard because obviously I don't want to disrespect any of the people, but by saying one. But the Cortina you mentioned, I just can't go past the Cortina. When he pulled up to do what's in the barn, and I saw the quality of that build. Yeah, I was blown away. And I've been around, a lot of cars, a lot of builds and whatnot, and I was just blown away by that Cortina. Like if you're a car guy and you see a build, you look at little things like how the door lines up with the other door and door gaps and guard gaps and stuff like that. And yeah, this thing was perfect. So, but yeah, so full interior, full panel and paint. It was like a show quality car, and that got me excited because I was able to feature it on my channel in the series. So that's probably one of my favorites for sure.
Well, I want to go back to where we started. We were talking about the differences in the American muscle car scene versus the Australian muscle car scene, and you talked about how the wheelbases got a lot shorter. And one of the other things I've noticed in studying Australian cars, and by no means am I an expert, but it's not only the shorter wheelbase, but it seemed like four-door cars kind of took on had more of a following over the years in Australia than they did here, and as well as, of course, my channel namesake, straight sixes. Of course, the slant six, I see people's Mopar slant six builds, and I always talk about getting the Australian intake, or I think there's a supercharger kit that you can get down there, but not up here. So do you think that's more of a byproduct? Was that market driven, or do you think that's more of the trickle down effect of the companies were getting all of the leftover parts, and it was easier to build a car with four doors and an inline six in Australia because of that? Which side would you lean towards? What do you think drove that more?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think in Australia, the culture is very different. So obviously Australian car culture, but Australian personality is also very different. So I think back in the 60s and 70s, four doors were more popular because they weren't a muscle car back then. They were more so just a car that a father or a husband would buy to take his family around, but just had a 351 or a 350 Chev or whatever in it, and then they'd tinker with it and it'd bring them a little bit of joy. But they were just run of the mill cars. They weren't worth much, and yeah, they were sort of more just known to go on road trips, and there's even photos of $300,000 XYGTs, back in the day, towing boats and docking boats in the water and stuff like that. Like they were just sort of as an everyday car. It's only as time has gone on, they've become, with their racing history and the classicness, they've become these muscle car thing. But back then, they were just run of the mill. You could pick them up for cheap as chips, modify them in your garage, take the family out and just have fun. So I think that's why it's driven more towards the four door. While the two doors came out back then, two door variants did come out back then, they weren't as popular as the four doors back then. But interestingly enough, as time's gone on, the two doors now have become more pricey and popular almost as the four doors. So it's just all trends, I guess.
Well, I think even in North America, the two-door tends to be the more sought-after product of any vehicle. But one of the things that Grant and I tend to coin the phrase of odd body cars, and these are cars that may be four-door, they may be just an odd generation of a certain build, that we really want to see people kind of gather those cars up. And when I go back to your channel now, we go back to the 929s, and I think you're sitting on 4 of them right now. One of them being the wagon that you're looking to do the engine swap on. I've been following that series a little bit. So, what are your thoughts on having that? And maybe I'm wrong because I don't know the Australia car culture very much. But what are your thoughts on that odd body concept?
Of, for example, having a wagon that is, do you mean in the way of like my wagon over like a sedan or whatnot?
Yeah, or just having a car that's not normally
the reason,
souped up.
Yeah. So the reason that 99 wagon basically fell in my lap from a good friend. So I got a really good deal on it. But with that, my vision for that 99 wagon is because it's such an oddball compared to what is popular in the Mazda makes or in general. I wanted to make it look like, let's just say, average rubbish, a sleeper, but have it extremely quick and just surprise people for that factor. So that's sort of my reasoning behind wanting to modify something like that. And also going back to earlier when we started, it's affordable. The 4-door Mazdas and 2-door Mazda rotaries are just going for ridiculous money in Australia at the moment. So stuff like that. So I think affordability comes into it more so, as well as wanting to surprise a few people when I beat them off the lights.
So we're getting a lot of good questions in from the chat. I'm trying to take note of them here, and we'll try to address some of those later on in this show. But JC, talk about the just being more unique. That's what Car Guy Jason and I are all about, is standing out from the make and model standpoint. And you talk about how the wagons may be a little less popular, but where do the Utes kind of filter in as far as popularity? Is that what's the scene like there? Is that do you have your own street truck scene that's dominated by the Utes? I know when I was in Australia in 2012, it was interesting. My friend kind of explained it to me, like, because of the just government restrictions, how big a vehicle can be. No actual work truck is really much bigger than a Toyota Helix or Tacoma as we would have it here in the States. And I remember, like, I counted, I think I saw 2 trucks my entire time there, and I was there for almost 2 weeks, that were a half-ton size or larger, and they were both Ford imports. One was a 3/4-ton Super Duty, and so it really stood out amongst the crowd. But the Utes, where do the Utes kind of fall in line as far as popularity of modifications?
Mate, the Utes are a national Australian treasure. Don't you talk bad about the Utes. Utes are popular. Every tradie owns a Ute, basically. But yes, the scene is very different. Utes are a lot smaller, more traditional sized. Obviously, in America and Canada, you guys like everything large and in charge. In Australia, everything's a bit smaller. So yeah. But interestingly enough, as this is something I want to touch on. See, we had Holden and Ford, but they've shut down manufacturing in Australia, so we no longer have an Australian make anymore. And because of that, our cars are starting to be imported. So with that, now we're starting to get the bigger Utes, you call them trucks. We're starting to get the bigger Ford Raptors and whatnot. So I think that trend is going to change. But yeah, basically Utes were only created for the working class traditionally in Australia, and then obviously some people still like to modify them or whatnot. But yeah, the trend is changing over time, I guess.
Okay, let's try this one more time. We're at the point of the show where we like to give updates on our channels, things that are happening in upcoming channels. Grant, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the things that we can expect from Straight Six Fan in the near future?
Honestly, I'd rather save the time for more questions for Jason, because it's whatever you've heard the last 2 weeks, that you'll hear it again. So what about you, Streetcar Culture? What kind of updates do you have for coming up?
Bring the questions.
Okay, so we'll skip that part about upcoming things. We're going to jump right into the questions because we do in fact have a lot of them. So let's jump right into them. And Grant's got some written down there. So Grant, why don't we start off with some questions?
Well, in the event we don't get to all of them, I've tried to kind of rank them. So I'll start with the one, I think that's one of the best. So Gary Mathis asked, did Mad Max boost the image of the Ford Falcon?
That's a really good question. I think it boosts the image of the Ford Falcon for you guys because it was an international movie. It may have made the two-door a little bit more popular back in that era because, like I explained, four doors were probably a bit more popular. And also, I guess it also expired that culture in Australia where people have actually made replicas and whatnot. But yeah, I'd say more so just boosted the image of the two-door because, believe it or not, back in that day, the two-door was like laughed at compared to the four-door of the same model. So I think it just boosted that as well as get our cars maybe on a bit more of an international stage. Really good question.
Well, another question comes from Grimm's Auto Service, and I assume he's kind of his channel's more about the working on car side of things. And so I think he was just kind of curious: do you have any specific unique tools for your mechanic work down there that we might not, or just talk about what kind of tools do they have in Australia?
Yeah. So we basically share the same tools. Obviously, Australian built cars may use more metric type stuff, but overall, it's basically the same tools. Like every manufacturer all around the world, there might be special tools for pulling off fuel lines or getting to special hard to get bolts or whatnot. But overall, it's basically just your standard toolkit, your power tools, whatnot. You can get most stuff done. If you actually watch a series on YouTube called The Bush Mechanics, you can see that Australians don't even need tools.
Well, I do know that King Eric, the greatest of all, followed up and said that the Australians don't use tools; they use their bare hands. So well timed on that one, and that's where our next.
Eric.
Yeah. Well, and he has our next question, and he asks to explain a little bit about the Hemi 6.
Sorry, someone mentioned that the ratchets go backward. That made me laugh. Go on. Sorry, go ahead.
The Hemi 6, is that like a hemisphere?
Talk a bit about the Hemi 6.
Yeah.
To be honest, I've never been into Hemis or Chryslers, so I would have to do a little bit. I've never even played with them myself. I almost bought one as a first car, but I don't actually know too much about the Hemi 6. My apologies.
No worries.
I wish I knew everything.
Yeah.
I don't.
Well, so do we. Don't worry.
Good question. If you hit me up on my channel or Insta or something, I can follow that up for sure. If I find
well, I'm going to try to combine two questions here because it's kind of funny. One came in from Butch that it's funny because it's definitely it's kind of the reverse perspective on trying to reverse engineer what's a Ute for you guys. Of course, like shoot, I think it's just called the Holden Ute, maybe. But anyway, he says, do you see many of those GTO pickups down under? I saw they were making them back in the early 2000s. And actually, Butch, General Motors took the Holden platform, came over here and turned it into a GTO. But that was a true Australian. It's like an El Camino. But that's when I say Ute, I always think more of the like El Camino kind of style, not an actual like Toyota Helix truck.
The GTO front ends are quite an interesting topic because obviously you're correct. Holden or GM took our models over there and put a different front end on them, and then advertised them and sold them as a Pontiac GTO, I think. But when at the height of those models, you did see some people within the scene put GTO front ends on their vehicles here. But they were made fun of. So it wasn't the most popular thing. And what's been happening for years, even from our early Monaro 70s muscle cars, people traditionally have always put Chev badges in place of Holden badges if they had a 350 Chev and stuff, and that is also being teased. That is also made fun of within the scene. So don't do that if you're in Australia and you're listening.
Well, what's funny is
But,
over here, I've seen a couple
yeah.
Chevy SSs where they've done the reverse. They've found the Holden lion logo and put that on their grill. So that's always kind of just, I don't know. It's just fun or unique to see, but it's kind of like, I don't think anybody really gets it over here.
It's if you've done that, it's embarrassing. Just run what your cars make.
Well, that aside from explaining what you means, there was a debate: is it an acronym in the chat, or is it just short for utility? That's all the user comments at the moment. I've got one more myself, but what does UTE stand for?
It's basically short for utility.
Car guy, you have something to add?
No, I think we've kind of gone through a lot of the questions. I did see one more in there from Panther Platform Guy, who is asking, do you see many Panther platforms in Australia? So we're talking about the big Crown Vics, Ford Crown Victoria, Mercury Grand Marquis. I don't know if you guys had any of those down there, but they're big, great big boats.
Yeah, so what was the question, sorry? Did we have those models in Australia?
Right.
No, we did not. So, yeah. So basically, your American muscle cars are basically your cars. So we do have a lot of American muscle cars in Australia, but they're all imported. Nothing was really released similar or whatnot. You have your. I should correct myself. You have your little quirks, like for example, some of the Chevy. Some of the old Chevy 70s platform were actually for a limited run, say the Impalas, for a limited run, they were actually assembled in Australia. So you have sort of your little quirks like that. But for the most part, most of them are imported. I think that's fair to say.
Go ahead.
We can both hear each other take that deep breath in. Well, my final question for you, Jason, for the night is that, being a channel called Straight Six Fan, it'd be remiss to have an Australian guest on and not talk about the Ford Barra, at least for a little bit. And I know when I was there in 2012, we rented a Ford Falcon with a 4-liter inline six. It was the naturally aspirated one, not a turbo car, of course. The rental car company's not that stupid. But I still, to this day, wish I would have taken done the conversions on of course it was kilometers and liters to do miles per gallon, because we drove out of downtown Melbourne all the way to Port Fairy on the Great Ocean Road and only used, I think, less than a half a tank of gas. And I was just blown away how I could drive about, I think that was like an 8-hour drive, and only consume half a tank of fuel. So I was blown away about the economy of that. I was blown away by other Falcons passing me, towing boats, like you said, probably sporting the same 4-liter inline six. But this is kind of similar to that question about 4-doors earlier. What is it that's made this inline six such a cult classic, if you will, for so many years now in Australia?
Okay, so firstly, you blokes over down in Yankeetown only get terrible economy because you're running big blocks, 950 double pumpers with your mechanical secondaries. So that's the only reason you guys get economy. You guys don't know what economy is, but down in Australia, it's a refined art. The straight sixes are popular because they're a Australian built, engineered motor that can handle a lot of punishment. They're available in basically every platform that Ford brought out. So the cheapest chips, they can, even the NA gas versions can handle power, turbochargers straight out like in factory form, with just basically some cheap valve springs, maybe a billet oil pump gear, and you're at 300-400 kilowatts at the wheels. So I think that's why they're as popular in Australia. So to modify a V8 to get the same power versus a straight 6 turbo, the cost varies substantially. So that's why I think you can modify a Barra 6 for cheap have fun, have good power, and be competitive, or be a street light racer or whatever for a good budget. So I think that's what's made them most popular. And then now you've got people like Adam LZ and stuff overseas that have widening their international platform.
Siri, convert kilowatts to horsepower. Well, she's not talking back, but 300 kilowatts is 400 horsepower, guys. That's what he was getting at. So that's another thing we don't talk about.
How do you guys use Imperial?
Oh, come on.
A foot and a half. Let's just. Oh God, you guys not only am I in the future,
because we're still faithful to the Queen, man. Anyways, we a little bit. We are a little bit. So look, we've had an awesome chat talking about Australian cars versus American cars, and had a really fun time, Jason, having you on as part of our show this evening. I hope that having a little bit of exposure on this show helps grow your channel. Because that kind of is the goal of what we do here, is to expose some smaller channels that have some really great content, and help put you out there for everybody to see. So thank you for spending your Friday morning with us here on Thursday evening, and we really appreciate you taking that time and being a part of the show.
No, super appreciate it. I'm about to go order some poutine. And gonna lather it in maple syrup, and I'm gonna jump on my skateboard, do some half pipe. I can't wait. So I appreciate you having me on. Appreciate the love, Jace. Appreciate the love, Grant.
It was our pleasure.
All the power to Trump.
Oh no. Oh, okay. And on that note. So, having said all of that, I'm going to turn it over to Grant, who's going to close us out. Jason, stick around because we'll talk after the show goes off here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how else to end the episode any better than that in an election year. So we'll call it a show there. But thanks everybody for joining, being a part of our Thursday night, Jason's Friday morning, of course. And make sure you tune in next week. It will be on my channel. Don't forget to find us the next day on SoundCloud. I've got some catching up to do from vacation to get 2 episodes up now, because I didn't do last week's. But that's going to do it for this episode. Until next time, peace out.